The days had become shadows of each other. Morning arrived, but it no longer felt like a beginning. The sun still rose faithfully, spilling its light across her small kitchen, yet it seemed to shine for everyone but her. She moved slowly through her routine: tea kettle, pills, one slice of bread, the same armchair by the window. Nothing changed. Nothing called her forward. There had been a time when she used to mark the calendar. Birthdays, visits, small plans that made life seem alive. But now the calendar hung untouched, the pages curling at the edges, a quiet reminder that time kept moving even when she didn't. Sometimes she wondered if life was waiting for her to do something, or if it had simply forgotten she existed. She whispered into the empty room, "Another day, Lord. But what for?" And though no answer came, he heard. She had once loved color. The blue of the sky after rain, the red of her garden roses, the gold of evening light on the floorboards. Now all of it looked muted, as if someone had drained the world of its brightness. Her eyes still saw, but her heart didn't respond. The things that used to bring joy now felt far away. The radio songs, the laughter of children outside, even her own reflection in the mirror. She would stand by the window, watching people pass by, each of them going somewhere, each of them having something to do. And she thought, not with anger but with quiet sadness, their world still moves, mine stopped. That was the strange cruelty of despair. It didn't shout. It simply dimmed the light until everything looked grey. But even grey skies are not empty. Behind them, the sun still waits. And soon, that waiting light would find her again. Her mornings had no why. She woke because her body still knew how to wake, not because she wanted to. She used to write lists, things to do, meals to prepare, people to call. Now, her notepad sat blank beside her chair. The future had become a long corridor with no doors, no light at the end, no reason to walk. Sometimes she'd whisper prayers she didn't believe in anymore. "Give me strength," she'd say softly. But strength for what? There were no grandchildren visiting, no letters in the mailbox, no laughter to expect at dinner. Her world had shrunk to 4 walls, and even faith seemed to grow smaller within them. Maybe, she thought, this is what the end of hope feels like. Not pain, just silence. But she was wrong. Hope wasn't gone. It was sleeping, and Jesus was already on his way to wake it. That night she sat in bed longer than usual. The air felt heavy, as if even the room itself was tired. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded them in her lap. She didn't cry. She was past crying. Her voice came out as a whisper, fragile and almost ashamed. "Maybe it's better if I don't wake up tomorrow." It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't defiance. It was simply the voice of someone who had run out of reasons to keep waiting for joy. She closed her eyes and breathed slowly, half hoping that sleep would be the last thing she ever felt. But heaven was not silent that night. There was movement in the unseen, a stirring, gentle, and holy. For when despair speaks, Jesus listens closer. And when his children whisper that they can't go on, he begins his walk toward them. Before dawn came, he had already decided. She will not face another morning alone. The next morning came softly, but it brought no relief. The heaviness still lingered, like fog that refused to lift. She tried to pray again, slowly, quietly, almost out of habit. "Lord," she said, "if you can hear me, please do something." But there was no sound, no warmth, no stirring in the room. It was as if her voice had gone no further than the ceiling, as if heaven itself had turned to stone. For years she had prayed, for her husband's healing before he passed, for her children's safety, for peace in her heart. Some prayers had been answered, most had not. Now her faith was thin, like old paper worn at the edges, and she began to wonder if maybe God only spoke to others, to the stronger ones, to the ones who still had something to live for. "Maybe I'm forgotten," she murmured, and though she didn't see it, her words broke his heart, because not one prayer had ever been unheard. He was waiting, not to speak louder, but to speak when she would finally listen differently. Dawn used to be her favorite part of the day. When her husband was alive, they'd watch the sunrise together, hands wrapped around steaming cups of coffee, breathing in the newness of morning. Now, dawn felt cruel. The light that once meant promise now felt like exposure. Proof that another day had come, another day she would have to endure. She sat by the window, watching the sun climb through pale clouds, and whispered, "Why do you keep waking me up, Lord, if there's nothing left for me to do?" Her voice cracked on the last word. It wasn't anger. It was fatigue, a weariness that went deeper than her bones. It was the soul itself, tired of hoping. But somewhere beyond that pale morning sky, heaven was preparing an answer, not in thunder, not in light, but in a voice. A voice that would soon break through the silence and change everything. The house had become her world, and in that world, time no longer moved. Days bled into nights, and the rhythm of existence had slowed to quiet survival. She no longer thought of the future. She barely remembered the past. All that remained was the endless present, empty, soundless, grey. She caught her reflection once in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The eyes looked the same, but the light inside them was gone. "I think I've already gone," she said softly. "Only my body forgot to follow." It was a strange kind of death, not of the body, but of the will. And yet, in that stillness, something sacred waited. Because when life grows silent enough to sound like the end, that is often where resurrection begins. Jesus had been watching her, not from afar, but from within the silence itself. He was about to speak. And when he did, her tomorrow would be reborn. The mind can be a quiet tormentor. It doesn't shout, it repeats. "There's nothing left for me." The thought came like a tide, rising each night, retreating with the morning, only to return again. She tried to distract herself, reading old letters, turning on the radio, humming forgotten hymns, but the silence always won. Loneliness doesn't just live in empty rooms. It lives in words never answered, in hopes never returned. One evening, as rain tapped softly on the roof, she said it aloud for the first time, "There's nothing left for me." And in the unseen realm, heaven fell silent, not in indifference, but in reverence. Because that moment, the lowest, most fragile confession of despair, was the very place God had chosen to meet her. He was about to speak, not to scold, not to argue, but to remind her that where she saw an ending, he had only just begun. That night, the silence was too much. She sat in her chair, staring at nothing, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. She wanted to pray, but even prayer felt like too much effort, so she simply sat there, breathing, waiting for something she couldn't name. And then, without thought, without strength, a single tear slipped down her face. It wasn't loud, it wasn't desperate. It was quiet, the kind of tear that doesn't even reach the chin, but it carried her whole soul within it. And heaven, vast, radiant, alive, stilled to receive it, because God does not wait for perfect words. He waits for surrender. That tear was enough to break the silence between her heart and his, enough to open the door for the voice she was about to hear. And though she didn't know it, as she wiped her eyes with a trembling hand, Jesus had already leaned close. The room grew different, not brighter, not louder, but different. The kind of difference one feels in the soul before the mind can understand it. The air felt thick, almost warm, as though someone had entered without moving the door. Her body froze, not from fear, from recognition. It wasn't imagination, it wasn't dream, it was presence. She had lived through decades of quiet, but this silence was alive. It hummed softly as if the air itself had begun to breathe. Her pulse quickened, her eyes filled again. And for the first time in many years, she dared to whisper, "Jesus." The word trembled into the stillness, and in that sacred pause before sound returned, the silence answered back, not with emptiness, but with life. Topico 11. The voice that broke the dark, soft but clear. It came within her heart. "You are not finished." She didn't hear it with her ears. She heard it inside her, a voice that seemed to bloom from the deepest part of her being. "You are not finished." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of heaven. They seemed to echo through her whole life, through every unanswered prayer, every lonely night, every sigh she'd buried in the dark. She sat still, her breath caught between disbelief and awe. Tears filled her eyes again, not from pain this time, but from recognition. The voice was tender, yet strong, familiar, yet eternal. And it came again, slower this time, each word resting gently over her weariness. "You are not finished. I still have tomorrow for you." Her heart began to race. Her hands pressed to her chest, and for the first time in years, she felt warmth there, real, pulsing, alive. The words didn't just echo, they entered. They settled into her like light, filling the cracks of a broken vase. Each syllable seemed to mend something that had long been torn. The pain didn't vanish, but it changed shape. It no longer hurt, it glowed. The memories of loss softened, the loneliness quieted. Her heart, the one she thought had grown too old to hope, began to beat with purpose again. She leaned back in her chair, eyes closed, breathing in the sweetness of the moment. She whispered, "Lord, I thought you were silent." And though he didn't reply with words, the air itself seemed to answer, not with sound, but with presence. The same presence that says everything without saying anything at all. And there, in that sacred stillness, hope was reborn. She couldn't explain it, how something invisible could feel so tangible. It began like a small warmth behind her ribs, a flicker that refused to fade. It wasn't sudden joy, it wasn't even happiness. It was hope, the kind that doesn't depend on circumstances, the kind that simply decides to live again. Her body still ached, her days still looked the same, but something had changed underneath it all. She began to notice things. The softness of the light through the curtains, the sound of sparrows outside, the way the air smelled faintly of rain. She hadn't realized until then how much she'd stopped seeing beauty. Now everything looked touched by kindness, even the silence. That light inside her wasn't just feeling. It was his voice still echoing. "You are not finished." And in that truth, her soul began to breathe again. The morning after that holy night, she awoke before the sun. At first, she thought the peace she felt was a dream, but when she placed her hand over her heart, it was still there, steady, calm, new. She sat up slowly, letting the early light spill across her face. Her lungs filled deeply, and it felt like the first real breath she'd taken in years. It was strange how something so simple, breathing, could feel like worship. Tears came again, but these were soft, gentle as rain. She whispered into the stillness, "Thank you for letting me wake up." The same dawn that once felt cruel now felt like promise. And when the sun broke through the horizon, it painted her small room in gold, as though heaven itself was saying, "Yes, child, today still belongs to you." Her Bible had been closed for weeks, maybe months. It sat on the table like a memory, its pages gathering dust, its words waiting. That morning she reached for it. Her fingers trembled as she turned the cover. The pages fell open at random, and her eyes landed on a verse she hadn't read in years. "For I know the plans I have for you," declares the Lord, "plans to give you hope and a future." She stared at the words until they blurred through her tears. It wasn't coincidence, it was confirmation. Each word seemed to breathe, not as ink on paper, but as life spoken directly to her soul. She whispered, "You're still talking to me, aren't you?" And deep inside, she felt the answer, not as sound, but as joy. It was a small beginning, but beginnings never stay small when Jesus is involved. She hadn't stood up without effort in a long time. Her knees were stiff, her back unsteady, but something inside her urged her forward. Step by step, she walked to the window and pulled back the curtains. The light that entered wasn't ordinary. It was gentle but full, warm like a promise kept. She let it rest on her face, and her eyes closed automatically, not in pain, but in peace. Her lips curved into a small, grateful smile. "I see you," she whispered. The day stretched before her, ordinary, quiet, but no longer empty. It didn't matter what she would do that day. The point was that she could. that life still moved within her, that hope had hands and breath again. In that single moment, she understood the miracle. She hadn't been healed from life. She'd been healed for life. The days followed, quiet but no longer heavy. She moved through them slowly, gently, carrying something invisible. Like a flame she kept close to her chest. The voice she'd heard that night hadn't left her. It wasn't a memory, it was presence. Sometimes, while washing dishes or folding laundry, she'd pause, just for a moment, because she could almost hear it again. Soft, steady, familiar. "You are not finished." Those words had become her anchor. When old fears tried to return, when the loneliness crept back through the cracks of her thoughts, she would close her eyes and whisper, "I know you're still here." And every time peace would return, not loud, not dramatic, but deep and sure, like steady ground beneath her feet. The voice that once shattered her despair had now become her companion, and through it she had learned the truth. Hope doesn't always shout. Sometimes it stays and whispers. As her strength returned, so did something else, purpose. She began making small calls, nothing long, nothing planned. Just a gentle, "How are you?" to neighbors, old friends, even distant relatives. Some were surprised, some cried, some simply listened as she spoke softly, her voice carrying the same warmth that had once rescued her. She started writing letters too, short notes with verses of hope, sent to people she hadn't seen in years. The postman noticed. "You've been busy lately," he said, smiling. She only nodded. She didn't need to explain, because this wasn't busyness. It was obedience. The same Jesus who had spoken to her in despair was now speaking through her in kindness. Hope, once a gift she had received, had become the gift she now gave away. And in giving it, she found herself renewed again. Not everything changed. Her body still tired easily, her house was still quiet most days, but the emptiness was gone. Peace had taken its place, not the kind that erased pain, but the kind that sat with it and made it gentle. Sometimes she'd stop mid-afternoon, hands resting on her lap, eyes closed in gratitude. Her heart no longer asked for proof, only for nearness, and every breath felt like prayer. She no longer waited for something good to happen. It was already happening. Every time she woke, every time she spoke kindness, every time she felt his voice moving softly within her chest. The days no longer stretched endlessly. They flowed, like quiet rivers, toward a peace she no longer feared to meet. It was evening when she went home. The light outside was golden, soft like a blessing resting over everything she'd ever loved. She sat in her chair, Bible open on her lap, eyes half closed, lips curved in the faintest smile. Her breathing slowed, steady, calm, unafraid. And then, without sound, without struggle, she heard it again. That same voice, gentle and familiar, but now closer than ever. "You are not finished. Come and see what I have prepared for you." Her heart answered before her lips could move, and in that instant she was gone, not to nothingness, but to fulfillment. The room stayed quiet, filled not with absence but with peace. It felt as though someone had just left, and yet somehow had also remained. Her tomorrow had come, and it was eternal.